Before we get started and I ask my first question, I just want to set the stage around reskilling and upskilling. Reskilling, just so we have some definitions, involves training employees with new skills to do a different job. And upskilling involves training your employees about new technologies or improved systems. So that's the framework of the discussion today. And Tina, I want to come to you first for the first question, if you don't mind, and you could introduce yourself as you answer. Traditional frameworks have assumed, right, that roles would remain the same and unchanged and always move at a ladder-like trajectory. However, what we know from Gardner and McKinsey, they've published some reports recently that have said that as the adoption of technology increases, 50% of our workforce is going to have to get reskilled. So, Tina, what tactics are you deploying to address your skill gaps?
Okay, Paul, leave it to you to start out with the big, heavy question. Delighted to be here. Just quick introduction. I'm sitting here from home office in Boston. I work for Schneider Electric, an energy management and sustainability organization, and I'm the head of talent and diversity. So in the talent space, indeed, it involves talent acquisition, learning, talent management, leadership development. And you are right, Paul, for us, from the very top to the countries in which we play, probably upskilling, a little bit of reskilling. I'll get into that later with the panel, but building skills for the future is probably the #1 people priority for our business right now.
And so, yeah, what are you deploying to address those skill gaps?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things, but I guess quickly I would start with, there's 2 drivers for us at the broad strategic level that's really shaping some of the actions we're taking. So one thing for sure, especially in accelerating our drive to be super focused on technology and digital in the energy space, we are more focused than ever on expertise. It's nothing new, but the whole notion of a T-shaped employee, a T-shaped leader, not that we don't want the breadth, we need that breadth, but increasingly, how do we double down and accelerate the development of expert skills? Everything from hiring to attracting, but especially the build part of the equation is a big strategic push. The second thing, we're already saying the word skills, but I think we toss that word around a lot. What we're trying to do in Schneider Electric, and it is not easy and it is a work in progress, is to unpack this whole notion of upskilling into very pragmatic level. So what I mean by that is defining the top domains that we're trying to do in terms of upskilling. And for us, it's mainly digital, technical, like electronics and electromechanics, and a heavy dose of commercial, certain elements of our sales transformation, and making those as granular and applied to the average you and me, Paul, on the ground in the country. And that has been a big piece for us as well. And the third big lever is digital. I mean, you've mentioned it before. Not that learning will, face-to-face learning will never go away and we still need it, but we've now moved to about 85% of all of our learning being digital, and we want to get higher while still reserving a small percentage of face-to-face connections. Now, back to your question, what tactics are we doing? One thing I would like to highlight, it's nothing fancy, but we found a huge need of the company to just understand future skills and gaps. So we're all toying with different tools, and how do you do that? And so we have piloted in the last 18 months a ingrown tool with a lot of advice from our experts on really mapping the future skills vis-a-vis individuals at the plant level, at the office level, skill by skill, proficiency level by proficiency level, and holding managers and employees accountable to track and report. It is a simple yet global tool. We've now deployed it to about 150 of our locations and still a lot more to do. But for once, we're finally speaking the same language when we're talking about what skills of the future we actually need and what kind of gaps. A second thing, and you guys interrupt me when you need to, but another thing is we also said everyone's interested in upskilling, and we will definitely push on that for all employees to continue growing their career. But we also have to be a little bit selective. So like I said earlier, we've picked the top 5 domains where we have to absolutely build expertise. And here it's everything from really looking at training, but also making sure that there's other things besides skills training going on. And one of the initiatives we recently launched was making sure managers help their employees build skills. It was a big feedback that we learned that in the end, employees didn't always have the knowledge, they didn't have the access to the tools, they didn't always feel comfortable just saying, I want to learn, I want to find a skill. So we have now launched an effort with all our managers worldwide to really make sure they have the coaching capabilities to talk about career, help identify skills, and also create a psychologically safe environment to skill up. Last quick thing, one of the things we also know, as you allude to, it's no longer about career maps and just building skills and trudging along in our careers in a vertical way. Employees are in the driver's seat, even with some economic headwinds coming in our way. I think employees will continue to have transparent ways to find skills. They want the diagnostics, they want the tools. So we continue in our now 3-year journey of our open talent market, which is an AI-driven market internally focused on available jobs, internal gigs, mentors, and the requisite trainings and trainings for skills that you need to upgrade. So this is a big digital platform that we're playing with that we hope also says to employees, don't sit back. You have a job in yourself to also upgrade. Get in the game with us.
Tina, one of the things that I really appreciate about what you just articulated is that you're taking a people-centric approach. And as I want to ask Sandra, who comes from Johnson & Johnson, she started with more sheep than people. That's what she told me before we started this. And Sandra, in a people-centric situation where, reskilling is going to take individual perspective and company perspective, right? Organizational vision. What tactics are you deploying at J&J to address your skill gaps?
It's a great question, Paul, and just so nice to be with you. And maybe I need to clarify that sheep to people. And hopefully you can hear from my accent. I'm originally from England, and then had the opportunity to move to the United States with Johnson & Johnson and the first CLO. And with that comes the story of why I am taking this challenge that we're all working through, is to really help every individual to really skill up in our crazy changing world. And when you think about a company like Johnson & Johnson, we are grounded in our credo, and we have a mission for changing the trajectory of health for humanity around the world with 150,000 employees. And I've been thinking a lot about, if you could really unlock the potential of every single person, how many problems are we really going to be able to solve? And that really is the challenge we're going through. So I was asked to look at how we could unlock that full potential. And it does start, as Tina mentioned, getting your human capital and personalized learning ecosystem up and running. And last year we launched Johnson & Johnson Learn. And within that, it literally is using technology of the artificial intelligence to be able to understand the unique skills that every single person, has within our organization. Now, what I will tell you, in our personal lives, we have some amazing apps around understanding, where do we go on vacation using, your travel apps, and then you have apps in your personal life to help you shop or help you to consume content. But we didn't quite have that in the realm of our work lives. And now that is all possible. So what I love about this conversation around upskilling, it's a critical component, and personalizing learning and development uniquely to every single individual so they can skill up to be able to do their job for today, but also to be able to see the career navigation that they would like to pursue and skill up for those future jobs in a very, very targeted approach. In addition to that, right, because the skilling up is important, but I will tell you, many of us will believe it is really still around building those skills. You've then got to go into the application part of this and the experience. So being able to unlock agilely people to be able to go and work on projects, change jobs, work on gigs, small-term assignments is equally important. And then, as we all say, and why we all know each other on this call, is because mentorship and sponsorship is also important. So in many of these ecosystems we're building, we're literally digitizing that whole ecosystem of learning and development, gigs, mentorship with purpose, and then opening up the aperture to opportunities, whether they are full-time positions, the internal talent marketplace, or indeed if they are just small assignments where people can go and apply and really ensure those skills that they do want for their future careers is getting to a strong level of competency. So I can tell you everything that's happened, over the last couple of years has helped us as learning leaders to be able to accelerate, truly democratize learning and development and accelerating, moving people into new jobs and where we have those skills gaps.
You've introduced such an important concept of identifying adjacent skills through the AI platform. Is it proprietary to J&J or is it an open market AI source?
Yeah, we've partnered with a strategic vendor to open that up, and then we have matched it. And the magic is matching that to our own job catalog to enable then the internal talent marketplace, and that is the magic.
Mm-hmm. So we've addressed a couple of key concepts, and we've got Noah next from Moderna. Noah, Tina talked about people, organization, right, and the manager, getting the manager on board. Sandra just talked about using an AI intelligence tool, to really identify people's skill sets and adjacent skill sets for upskilling. Noah, what is Moderna doing in terms of deploying? What are you deploying, or how are you addressing skill gaps?
Also, likewise, great to be here amongst this really esteemed group. Appreciate the opportunity to participate. So what are we doing around upskilling? How long do you have, Paul?
29 more minutes.
Right. Okay. Well, we've grown really fast, as I think a lot of people know. So we have relied quite a bit on hiring, just because of the rate at which we've needed to scale up our organization, obviously due to the demands of the pandemic. But with what we're putting into our portfolio now and our pipeline, we have a vision of a very different kind of company with a lot of new capabilities. We call ourselves a platform company, which means the underlying technology that basically underpins every product that we would put out into the marketplace for any indication. It has the same basic technology that powers it. So obviously we have to start with the science. This is like advanced science. mRNA science is also a new medical domain compared to many others. And so when you're out looking in the marketplace to hire people with mRNA backgrounds, it's not that big of a marketplace. So you've got to have a buy and build strategy. I always get the question, are you buying or building? It's like both. We're doing whatever is possible to get the scientific talent in the door. Also on the manufacturing side, right? Like scaling, like the way we had to do during the pandemic requires an all hands on deck supply chain, an all hands on deck manufacturing operation, and all hands on deck quality and EHS capability. So there is a huge need to upskill in all of those domains, as well as the skills that come in the manufacturing space that will be driving the future. For example, advanced manufacturing, robotics, Lean Six Sigma. So there's a lot there as well, and the gaps are created because of the speed of the growth across the entire company. I think there's been a lot of conversation around AI. We aspire, and we're a relatively young company. We're only about 12 years old, so we're not encumbered by so many legacy systems. So our goal is to become AI first and digital first. Let's not create manual systems that then need to be digitized. Let's create a digital first organization, which means we need to be looking to digitize everywhere. That's actually one of our Moderna mindsets, digitize everywhere. And that it needs to be powered by AI. We have a huge amount of data, huge. And I'd say we are just early in the journey of figuring out how to use all that data to predict better outcomes for patients, to figure out where we need to make things, supply things, source things, distribute things, what populations we're serving, what populations we're not serving. So there's the power of data is almost endless, and I'd say there's obviously an upskilling journey that needs to take place to just to build that into all aspects of our organization. So I guess, and I could keep going. That's why I asked you how long you had. But it's definitely some of the same things that the other panelists are talking about: AI and digital, chemical manufacturing and controls, both in traditional models and then kind of in, what the future has to hold for those domains, the future of supply chain, the future of advanced manufacturing and robotics. And then obviously the big area, the big focus for, areas is the underlying science or that drives our platform, which is messenger RNA, and that's a growing field. I think it's going to be. We're working with technical schools, we're working with apprentice programs, outreach programs, just about every place we can go to find that talent or to begin people developing in that way earlier in their career, so that they want a career in mRNA and could look at a company like Moderna as a good place to come and work.
If I could just build on Noah's point, and I think the juxtaposition is great. I mean, I think Sandra and myself, a few others, maybe we're not called the young, maybe we're the older companies, but the need for skill development is just increasing. And I would make the general comment, regardless of the domains and areas, but clearly we all have some common ones around digital and technical areas. For me, my own observation is, especially the last couple of business cycles, last couple of years, the push from the business has just exponentially grown. And I'm not saying learning or training was always a people or HR push topic, but the pull, if you will, or the demand, given that urgency, and it is a build buy equation, Noah, you're absolutely right. And we probably are a little bit more on the build side than the buy, but also in the buy space. But there's nothing more exciting and challenging, I suppose, when the business is just like ahead of the curve and actually demanding this a tremendous need to upskill and reskill, as well as the employee base, right? And that's another fascinating thing that, again, nothing new, but the culmination of employees asking for it and the business asking for it. It's a great space to be in right now. So just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Christopher Lynn, you're the CLO for ChenMed, and besides being funny, I'm wondering, a good sense of humor. I'm wondering, how are you bringing new value to this conversation around upskilling and reskilling? We've heard from the panelists, other panels. Yeah.
So some of the things that resonated, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we talked about, I don't need to go, they said it and let me say it in a different lens too, because I think there's some similarities where I tend to color outside the lines, which is just part of my persona. And by the way, I'm super excited to be here. My wife's 38 weeks pregnant with number 7. So I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. So I'm actually really glad to be here. We've experienced the explosive growth as well. So when I joined just under 2 years ago, we were 1,500 people, and now we're over 6,000. So to go through that kind of expansion in such a short period of time, this whole skill conversation brings new meaning, because some of the apocalyptic conversations in the industry, like everything's changing, everything is never going to be what it was before. It actually isn't true. There's a lot more consistency than we like to admit. And I think when you're scaling like that, you have to focus on what are the big surgical plays that are durable, because you can't chase the whim of everything yes, things are changing, but at the core, a lot's actually staying really consistent. A lot is still very consistent. It's a new application of it. And so what we're doing is saying, what are those big plays we can make that we know we may have to tweak and modify along the way, but ultimately we can make the investment in these skills and things like that. And it's going to sustain. And that's adding real value to the business, because instead of feeling like we're in this constant cycle of churn, we're saying, actually, you're not. These are the things that we're going to invest in, and they're going to be durable and sustainable. And that actually brings a sense of calm, not only to the business, but even to the employees, because they have a sense of agita as they're hearing like, we have to reskill you or upskill you. And they go, I mean, are you saying I'm irrelevant in what I've done for the last 20 years? No, we're not. Actually, there's a few core things we need to grow you in to meet the needs of the business. The other one that I'm really heavily invested in that I think actually goes against the reskill is there's a lot of things that people don't actually need to build skills in, because they're changing too fast to actually invest in skill development. And so I'm really heavily invested in where can we do system and process automation and actually not waste the time trying to skill people up on things that ultimately are going to change before they would even have the time to build the skill to do it well, and say, look, these systems, we know they're going to change. So let's use a digital adoption technology so you don't have to learn it. We don't teach people how to read a map and be a cartographer anymore because you have Waze or Google Maps. So it's one of those things where we go, well, let's use the systems to automate and guide people and not force them to learn stuff that is perishable. It's going to be gone before they have a chance to do it. So those are two of the biggest things. And I think those two things initially, when I joined, were met with a little bit of like, that sounds really counterintuitive. So there was a fair amount of selling that I had to do to help the organization see this may not be the conversation you're always hearing, but these are some of the really bold plays we can make that are going to help us, navigate this crazy storm.
Sandra. Chris, I'd love to join on the back of it, because I couldn't agree with you more that, everyone thinks their hair's on fire, and actually I don't think it is. What is common to all of us is digital transformation, right? And you can use that word digitally in multiple different ways, and how work is getting done is changing. And therefore, actually, you're having these completely new roles, which is really exciting. So when you're talking about, and as we all mentioned, we're all getting amazing AI platforms, to help us, but it's actually, what I love about it, it's giving you the data to be able to do workforce planning at a completely different level, right? That to me is the gold dust. And then with that insight, you then know the problem you're solving for. And actually, maybe to make you smile, at Johnson & Johnson right now, the number one skill I'm worrying about, and it actually came out from our earliest panelists, was coaching skills of people leaders is more important now than it's ever been. And so actually we're doubling down on that skill. Now that's not something new, but with all what's gone on in the last couple of years, that human skill of coaching and being an empathetic leader and how you do that is more important than right now than probably learning Python. I'm using a complete opposite analogy here. So I do think part of our job is using the data, working closely, and actually our other panelists said this, working with the business to understand where they're taking their business areas. And then there are areas where we don't have the human capital yet. And that's what you were talking about. Now, you need new people in supply chain, new people in MRA. They're all new things that you need maybe an acquisition strategy rather than a build strategy. So I think one of the biggest changes for learning and development organizations is in fact our own skill set of starting with data and insights much more. And then I do think the other big piece is keeping some calm in the organization of what is not changing and helping in those places where we really need to make a difference.
So
the
Sandra,
two pieces you said on that, I have to jump back on that because you said two things that I really want to. Here's the fun part of the panel where we can all just jump on top of each other and talk about this. Because the two things you said that I think are so important with that are, one, this helping people understand not everything is changing is really important even to the psychological safety. And that's something that's often not talked about. We don't talk about the fact that like this reskilling thing is causing identity crisis in a lot of workers, and it's harming productivity, it's harming engagement. We're seeing burnout go up, and it's because on top of all the changes, people are terrified that they're becoming irrelevant. And so we have a unique responsibility to say, we are here to guide you through this change because you do matter. You do bring value. We want to help shape and mold that. And the other thing you said that I think is so important, so much of the work I did when I joined actually was internal to my own team in terms of our skills. I think that's such an important part that if we don't have the skills and we aren't eating our own dog food, we need to start there and go, how do we build the skills to make sure we're doing this really well? Because even going back to how are we bringing some of this value, we have to model this for the organization. So talent mobility, we're doing it in our own teams and injecting them into the organization so they can kind of spread that across the organization. We're modeling what good looks like in terms of continual skill development, all these things. And it's like, we have a chance to be a shining example to the organization of not only are we going to tell you how to do it, but we're actually going to show you and then coach you and develop you along the way.
So for all of you listeners, I mean, there is gold in this conversation. These panelists have hit on how they're addressing things organizationally, individually, at the manager level. They've talked about how AI intelligence, right? How Sandra talked about how she's deploying that to identify adjacent skill sets. Chris, you just talked about the big muscle movement piece, right? How you're identifying big muscle movements in the organization and you are deploying systems and process automation. And then Sandra, you came back to the people-centric piece of how are our people, you know, how you're supporting your people here through this change. I'm really curious about the cultural norm piece for all of you. You know, with reskilling and upskilling, as you just said, people feel unstable. How are you all adjusting for cultural norms to ensure that when an employee wants to upskill or needs to be reskilled, that the manager supports that? Because often managers don't want to lose valuable talent. So how are you addressing this within your organizations?
One thing, Paul, I mentioned earlier, and I think a lot of the organizations are now doing that, is giving the data and the transparency to the employees, right? You can find as much of that information in the external market these days. You should have it at a minimum the equal in the internal organization. So at Schneider, with the open talent market, I mean, we have 150,000 employees. So it's not everyone is on there, but about 80,000 people are on the platform of really having transparency around jobs, gigs, projects, mentors, et cetera. And it puts a little bit of transparency. It also puts a little bit of accountability for each of us to not sit back and wait for a manager to tap you on the shoulder, right? To own that piece. The thing I think that is interesting also parallel with that is how you start to, and I think many of the panelists alluded to, deconstruct the way we traditionally think about a job, right? You have this job, I got to do X. If my X skills are becoming obsolete, maybe there is a sense of I'm falling behind. But if we can just reimagine the way a job is, your affiliation may not be I'm an HR person and these are the areas. What if you are defined by a set of skills, hard, soft, what have you, that really are ones that give you versatility in what you can do? It's not scripted in by a job family or particular task. And one of the things we set up a big project last year. It's a total work in progress, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about this offline too. We've been looking at how employees truly understand their own skills, their own skill gaps, and then not only train for those skills, but is the company, for example, able to codify, get market data and reward for those skills? So again, deconstructing the job. You're not just an HR generalist with X years of experience coming from this pedigree, therefore your market value is Y. How do you think about, I'm a professional with all these types of skills with market value, with transparent rewards data? It becomes a different game in which an employee starts to develop and the company starts to support.
Maybe, Paul, I'd love to add, right? You know, and this is going back to keeping some things consistent. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, we have as a gift, and you always say, what are the tools or the wisdom that you can share? And these are really simplistic ideas. We have a development framework. And it starts with reflection and insights of the individual. And, you know, in the old way of doing that, we all used to have a PDF file of, you know, thinking about, you know, what's your interest, you know, where are your strengths, you know, what could those career journeys, you know, could be. We've now digitized that in what we call our J&J Learn Discover. So again, it's starting with those insights and personal reflections that you do yourself. And I can tell you, I'm doing that at least every 6 months myself. And I'm skilling up in certain things, you know, getting more, you know, agile as a HR leader. You know, I only moved into HR next year, so I got a lot to learn. But literally within that field, if you start right there again with your own purpose, is your purpose matching your company's? And does that motivate you every day to come to work? The next piece of that is exactly like Tina just shared, is the skills I have for today, what do I need to build for the future? And then it all maps to a career navigation. So I'm sounding like a broken record, but it doesn't matter whether it's me looking at my whole organization, starting with data and insights. You as an individual in your companies, you've got to start with what matters to you most. And I was joking earlier with the panel that, you know, I've been in J&J 32 years. And I'm extremely proud of that. And it's the reason is I'm a scientist at heart. I then came across J&J in my second job, and my purpose of making a difference to people's lives every day completely matches with my company. And then my company's allowed me to develop. And that's what gives you loyalty. It gives me this smile on my face every day because you're able to bring your whole self to work. And I do keep saying, you know, COVID and the digital revolution we're in has only helped all of us to have things at our fingertips to be able to do this better. And a previous role I was in, and probably a proudest accomplishment, was I was looking at surgeon education. And I'm now talking 7, 8 years ago, we started to look at what virtual reality could do to help a surgeon be more proficient at that first time they could touch a patient. And through using really good virtual reality simulation of product simulation and utilization, we actually changed that trajectory for resident surgeons around the world. Roll the clock forward 7 years. That is now, you know, with data proving it's quicker for a surgeon to learn through virtual reality, digital transformation, than it is from reading a textbook, watching a video, standing side by side with an expert. And now you can get into collaboration in virtual reality. It's a completely different game. So as you start thinking through all of this, there is amazing things that are happening in our world to really help people and help individuals just be better them, to help them deal with the ambiguity that Chris talked about. It's real. Every person knows they've got to keep, you know, developing and learning as they go forward. But I think we're hopefully making that easier with the digital transformation.
What's interesting about this, and the part I would add on the integration of it, is you just listening to some of your great examples, and even in my career where I've seen the best examples, is this integration of development into their work. I think where it falls apart, and this is a mindset shift that we have to make as L&D leaders, but also in the way we do things, is a lot of times people perceive development and learning as like this: send people off to a hookah lounge with beanbag chairs and go do some development for a bit, take a break from work, and then come back to work and then get your job done. Instead of saying, well, no, where success happens is when we say, no, development is work. Development is your work. And so like with my teams, we're really focused on how do we become more invisible to the organization, where it's less of a, hey, here's the learning thing, take a break from your job and go do this random activity that, you know, makes you feel better about yourself, and saying, yes, we want to address this, that you need to grow to feel better. People hunger for this development, but how do we make it feel just like this natural stretch projects, things where we're developing you closer to the flow of work, things like that, that actually then have more stability. And then you have managers less likely to push back and go, no, I don't really want my people going off and spending a bunch of time on useless activities. Well, no, neither do we. As the learning and development organization, we don't either. But that hasn't always been the case. And I think that's a shift we have to make.
You know, Chris, you just said the same thing Sandra said in a different format. You know, Sandra said that, you know, she's connecting her purpose to her company's vision, right? And, you know, really aligning that for herself is why she's been able to stay. And you just talked about development is work. And in there, you threw in coaching, you know, as part of that in this collective discussion. I'm curious, what is Moderna doing? You know, how are you adjusting your cultural norms to support this?
Well, we have a pretty specific culture, and we base it off of what are called the Moderna mindsets. There's 12. The first comment we usually get is, that's too many. And we go, well, okay, that's your opinion. Because we don't really follow the trends as actively as I think a lot of people suggest we should. There's no evidence that, you know, following trends or being, you know, sort of in line with what the pundits are saying is the right way to go. You have to, I think, decide what you are going to be and what you want your culture to be, and then just like own it 1,000%. And so we have a really specific culture. We know who we are. We know who we want to be. We also know very specifically who we don't want to be. We don't want to become layered. We don't want to become bureaucratic. We don't want to become slow. We don't want a million committees to make decisions. We don't want to become unable to make decisions. We don't want people to feel unsafe making decisions. And that's what happens when organizations become big and complicated. It's so like we know there's a force of gravity that's working against us, working against every organization, and we're fighting really hard to not become just one more of the pack, right? So we get a lot of opinions from the outside and we kind of take them in to learn from them, but we don't really feel like we need to follow them. So we have a really unique culture. It is a true learning culture. We learn in every way possible. Another thing that, you know, having been in the learning field for a long time, I see that the pendulum swing back and forth. It's in person, it's virtual, it's hybrid, it's this, it's like, it's all of that and more. And we don't need to exclude one thing for, you know, some new thing. There's space for all of them to live and coexist together. So I think I actually want to disagree a little bit with Chris and say like in-person together based learning is still important for us. You know, I mean, we do get a lot of people going, that's not where everything is headed. Well, that's what we're going to do. You know, you do what you do. And so we believe in being together. We think that that's what actually forms culture. And you can't create culture through a screen. And that's like a belief we have. So you know, but that doesn't rule out learning through digitally, learning in the flow, learning through experience. Like all of those things can be part of your strategy. So, you know, culture is an interesting thing. I think you need a strong learning culture. We actually, one of our Moderna mindsets is obsess over learning. And I feel like when you're an organization that is obsessed with learning, you're looking for every single possible way to do it. I do, you know, I've heard the theme come out a couple times around manager capability. You can't be a great learning organization if your managers aren't driving that. Like if they're holding people back from learning experiences because they got too many emails to clear in their inbox, like that's not a manager I want to have. And people should have the ability to give feedback to their managers and tell them, hey, you're getting in the way of my learning journey or my upskilling journey. So yeah, it's a great, you know, dialogue, but culture, I think it was a great question because it does kind of underpin the whole conversation.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I'm going to jump in on that real quick though, Noah, and just say one of the things I was going to say, because hey, you said you disagree with me, so I get to. I actually agree with you on the sense that it's like,
do we have to agree? Is that part of the panel?
No, we don't. No, we don't, and that's why I love it when we don't agree as panels. But actually, I think there are things that you said that I actually do really agree with. Is don't chase the trends and do the thing because that's what someone else did. You've got to really evaluate what are we trying to accomplish and what's the best way to accomplish that. And if the best way to accomplish what you're trying to do is in person, then do the in-person thing. But if that's going to detract or take away and you're doing it because that's what you're comfortable with, well, then don't do that. And I think it's about really figuring out what is the best way to accomplish things, then back into the solution. And I would secondly very much validate, I was going to say, we haven't talked enough about managers on this panel. That is an audience that has just been crushed over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of finger pointing, but at the same time, it's like, are you kidding? With a lot of managers, what they've had to deal with a workforce that's distributed, this whole skill thing getting bounced around, we are investing heavily in helping them through this transition because to your point, Noah, if our managers aren't equipped to handle it, just forget it. You're not going to make it.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm going to come on the back of you on the manager piece because it's just so important, right? That, you know, for a manager to perform, they've got to be at their best self first, right? So you mentioned it, their well-being, their resilience, and being that athlete, to be honest, at the best they can be for then helping their team. And so, you know, the investment we put in to ensure our managers are resilient, that they have that skill to be able to, you know, lead that team and get the whole team to be thriving is probably the most important thing we're all going to need to focus on next year because people are exhausted and are at that burnout level where that extra loving care is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and they're navigating that conversation where their people were in the office, then they were remote, then some want to come back, some don't. Senior leaders tell them to bring them back. Their people go, I don't want to. I mean, managers have a really, really tough spot right now.
Yeah, and we're in the middle of all that.
Yeah, you are.
Yep.
With 1 minute left, you all have articulated how important managers are in this process. And all the research indicates in reskilling and upskilling, right? Managers can be a block or they can be, a door. Tina, I'm curious, last thoughts from you on, if you were going to tell a company that's listening today, what's the one thing that you would want them to know about reskilling and upskilling that have been effective for you?
Start with the end user like you do with a customer. Start with your employee. Managers totally matter, don't get me wrong. But if you have enough guardrails, data, transparency, trust, empowerment, employees can do a lot on their own as well.
Sandra, any last thoughts?
Yeah, employee at the center and active listening with them, and then helping them, empower them, because we can now with individual learning that's personalized to what they want, is going to be the reason why people stay in companies.
Yeah, employees at the center, that people-centric view. Chris, how about you? Last words?
I would say this whole, and we've hit on this, but I would say I've seen it and it's possible that we don't have to say, do we choose the business first, the people first, or the manager first? It's just yes. It's just yes. There is a way to just do yes. It's hard and it's really hard work, but it's possible. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that you can do it. It is possible to do it all.
I mean, there's another people-centric answer, right? Noah, how about you? Last thoughts.
I would say, don't spin in circles based on the trends. Like, pick a course and kind of give it long enough to actually deliver some value. And there's probably 6 to 10 core skills in any organization that are going to define its future. So, you got to know what those are, and you got to go really hard on those through, every possible modality that you can deploy to build against those skills. Thanks for having us. It's been awesome.
Yeah, Chris, I know you're going to jump in here in just a second. Yes.
Yeah, I felt like I was at your conference there. I was like, this is amazing.
We just got started.
Yeah, we just got started as well. Let me throw the same question at Paul then. After such a great discussion, what was your key takeaway from listening to all the other panelists?
The key takeaway that I heard repeatedly, no matter what process you're in or where your focus area is, or if you're deploying AI, right, or you're combing through data, taking a people-centric approach by which you look at the individual need and the organizational need and aligning those in an upskilling, reskilling scenario, by where you ensure that the manager isn't a block, they're a door, is the key. I mean, I love the fact that Sandra's been at J&J for 20 some years. I mean, I just love that. I mean, that just speaks to how, that company has allowed her to grow and change and, develop in her work. So I think that's my takeaway.